They thought they knew me, the quiet girl who served their coffee, who smiled through their insults, who signed away her future without reading the fine print. But as I walked into that courtroom on a Tuesday morning in October, watching Robert and Eleanor Vance smirk at me from across the aisle, I knew something they didn't. I knew exactly how this story would end. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I took my seat beside Sarah Jenkins, my attorney. Bradley Vance, my so-called brother, lounged in his chair with that familiar contemptuous sneer plastered across his face. Eleanor whispered something to Robert, and they both chuckled. I had heard that laugh 1,000 times before. It was the sound of people who believed they were untouchable. Judge Morrison entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. As we sat back down, I noticed something strange. The judge's hands trembled as he shuffled through the papers on his bench. His face had gone pale, almost gray. He looked up at me, then back down at the documents, then at me again. His lips moved silently, and I could read them clearly even from where I sat. My God, that's Amelia Vance? The courtroom fell silent. Every head turned toward me. Robert's smirk faltered. Eleanor's perfectly painted lips parted in confusion. Bradley actually sat up straight for the first time in his life. And in that moment, I allowed myself the smallest smile. This was just the beginning. But to understand how I got here, you need to know where I started. You need to know about the years of hell that came before this moment of triumph. Growing up in the Vance household was like living in a beautiful prison. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. The Vance mansion sat on 5 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, with its white columns and manicured lawns. Robert Vance was the CEO of Vance Corp., a commercial real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. Eleanor was the picture of elegance, always dressed in designer clothes, always saying the right things at charity galas. And then there was me. I wasn't a Vance by blood. My mother, Rebecca, had married Robert when I was 3 years old, bringing me into this golden cage. Rebecca died in a car accident when I was 7, and from that moment on, I became something less than human in Eleanor's eyes. Robert had remarried within a year, choosing Eleanor not for love but for her connections to old money families. She came with her own son Bradley, who was 2 years older than me and had inherited every ounce of his mother's cruelty. I remember the first family dinner after Eleanor moved in. I was 8 years old, wearing a pretty blue dress that my mother had bought me before she died. I sat at the long mahogany table, trying to be invisible, trying to be good. The chandelier above cast prismatic light across the china and crystal. So, Eleanor said, barely glancing at me as she cut her filet mignon, Robert tells me you'll be attending Montclair Academy with Bradley next fall. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I hope you understand the privilege you're being given. She continued, her tone sharp. That school costs $40,000 a year. For someone like you, that's quite the investment. Someone like me. I would hear that phrase 10,000 times over the next 15 years. Someone like me, not a real Vance, not worthy of the name. A charity case, an inconvenience. Bradley laughed, spraying bits of potato across the table. Mom, do I have to go to school with her? Everyone's going to think she's my sister. Don't worry, darling, Eleanor said, reaching over to pat his hand. Everyone knows who the real Vanges are. Robert said nothing. He never said anything. He just buried himself in his newspaper, his phone, his work. If I was invisible to Eleanor, I was less than invisible to him. I was a mistake he refused to acknowledge. The only person in that house who ever showed me genuine love was my grandfather, Charles Vance. Robert's father had retired from running Vance Corp at age 75, but he still lived in the guest house on the property. He was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. While the rest of the family treated me like hired help, Grandpa Charles treated me like his own blood. Don't you listen to them, Amelia. He would tell me when we sat together in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of pipe tobacco. You've got more strength in your little finger than all of them combined. You've got your mother's heart, and that's worth more than all the Vance money in the world. He was the one who taught me to value myself when everyone else taught me I was worthless. He took me to museums, to bookstores, to the beach. He paid for my education without complaint. He defended me when Eleanor complained about the cost of my school clothes or my participation in the debate team. She's my granddaughter. He would say firmly, brooking no argument, and I'll spend my money how I see fit. But even Grandpa Charles couldn't protect me from everything. The daily indignities piled up like snow in winter, small at first, then suffocating. Bradley got a new BMW for his 16th birthday while I received a used bicycle. When Bradley failed 2 classes his senior year, Robert hired private tutors and made generous donations to ensure his graduation. When I made honor roll, no one even acknowledged it. At Thanksgiving dinner, Eleanor would introduce Bradley as my brilliant son who will run Vance Corp one day, while I was relegated to Robert's stepdaughter. The worst part wasn't the big moments of cruelty. It was the constant drip of disrespect, the 1,000 small cuts that taught me I didn't matter. It was Eleanor throwing away my college acceptance letters before I could see them because she didn't want me to get ideas above my station. It was Robert refusing to list me as family on the company health insurance. It was Bradley stealing money from my wallet and laughing when I confronted him because he knew no one would believe me. By the time I turned 18, I had learned to make myself small. I learned to apologize for taking up space. I learned to work 2 part-time jobs to pay for things Eleanor deemed unnecessary luxuries, like tampons and contact lenses. I learned that if I wanted to eat dinner, I needed to prepare it myself because the family chef was instructed to make meals for family only. I endured because I had nowhere else to go. I endured because Grandpa Charles needed me, especially as his health began to fail. I endured because some pathetic part of me still hoped that if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, maybe Robert would finally see me. Maybe Eleanor would finally accept me. Maybe I could earn the love that should have been my birthright. I was wrong about so many things back then. When I was 23, still living in a tiny converted storage room in the mansion's basement, I got a job as a paralegal at a small law firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I loved the work, loved the precision of legal language, loved the idea that there were rules that even powerful people had to follow. I started taking night classes in business law at the community college, paying for it with my paralegal salary. Eleanor found out, of course. She found out everything. "A lawyer?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're going to be a lawyer? Amelia, be realistic. You can barely afford those sad little community college classes. Real law school costs $250,000. Maybe you should focus on finding a nice husband instead, someone who can overlook your background." But I kept studying. I kept working. And I kept taking care of Grandpa Charles. His health had been declining for 2 years. At 82, he had developed congestive heart failure. He needed help with daily tasks, needed someone to manage his medications, needed companionship. The rest of the family couldn't be bothered. Robert was too busy with Vance Corp. Eleanor claimed it was too depressing to watch him deteriorate. Bradley was usually drunk or high by noon, so it fell to me. I became his caretaker, his companion, his connection to the outside world. I moved from my basement room to a small bedroom adjacent to his in the guest house. Every morning before work, I would help him dress, make his breakfast, sort his pills. Every evening, I would read to him, play chess with him, listen to his stories about building Vance Corp from nothing. "You're a good girl, Amelia," he would say, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "You're the only one who really cares. The only one who isn't circling like a vulture." I didn't understand what he meant then. I was too naive, too trusting. But he saw what I couldn't see. He saw the way Robert and Eleanor watched him, calculating his remaining time on Earth in terms of dollar signs. He saw the way Bradley would occasionally ask him pointed questions about his estate planning. He saw the greed that I was too close to recognize. 3 months before he died, Grandpa Charles called me into his study. It was a cold January afternoon, and snow was falling outside the windows. He looked tired, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Sit down, Amelia," he said. "We need to talk about something important." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, suddenly nervous. "I've been thinking about the future," he continued, "about what happens when I'm gone. I want you to know that I've taken care of you. I've made sure that you'll be provided for, that you'll never have to depend on Robert or Eleanor's charity again." "Grandpa, please don't talk like that," I said, tears already forming. "You're going to be fine." He smiled sadly. "We both know that's not true. I'm 82 years old, Amelia, and my heart is giving out. I'm not afraid of death, but I am afraid of leaving you unprotected." He pulled open a drawer and withdrew a thick envelope. "This is important. I'm giving this to you now because I don't trust anyone else to keep it safe. Inside is a copy of my will and a letter. If anything happens to me, if there's any question about my estate, I want you to have this. Keep it somewhere safe, somewhere they won't look." I took the envelope, confused. "What do you mean if there's any question?" "Just promise me you'll keep it safe," he insisted, his grip on my hand almost painful. "And promise me something else. Promise me you won't sign anything after I'm gone without reading it very, very carefully. Robert can be very persuasive, especially when he wants something." "I promise," I said, though I didn't really understand. "Good girl." He leaned back in his chair, looking exhausted. "Now tell me about your classes. How's that contract law course going?" We talked for another hour, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Grandpa Charles seemed agitated, worried in a way I had never seen before. When I helped him to bed that night, he held my hand for a long time. "I love you, Amelia," he said. "I'm proud of the woman you've become. Don't ever let them make you forget your worth." 6 weeks later, he was gone. I found him on a Tuesday morning in March. I had come to bring him breakfast and found him still in bed, peaceful, as if he were sleeping. The doctor said it was his heart. It had simply stopped beating during the night. I don't remember much about the funeral. I remember standing in the rain, watching as they lowered his casket into the ground. I remember Eleanor complaining about the mud ruining her Louboutins. I remember Bradley checking his phone every 5 minutes. I remember Robert's face, blank and unmoved, already thinking about whatever came next. I was the only one who cried. The morning after the funeral, Robert summoned me to his study. I came wearing the same black dress from the day before, my eyes swollen and red. I expected condolences. I expected, maybe, a moment of shared grief. Instead, Robert slid a stack of papers across his desk. "You need to sign these," he said, not even looking at me. "What are they?" I asked, reaching for the documents. He pulled them back. "Estate paperwork. Nothing for you to worry about. Just some formalities regarding my father's assets. Since you were living in his guest house, there are some liability issues we need to clear up." I remembered Grandpa Charles's warning. "Don't sign anything without reading it carefully." "I'd like to read them first," I said quietly. Robert's jaw tightened. "Amelia, this is a difficult time for all of us. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. These are standard documents. Eleanor and Bradley have already signed their copies." "Then it won't hurt for me to read mine," I said, surprised by my own courage. His eyes went cold. "Fine, take them. You have 24 hours. But Amelia?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Don't forget who has been housing you, feeding you, paying for your education. Don't forget what you owe this family." I took the papers and left, my hands shaking. Back in my room, I spread the documents across my bed. They were dense with legal terminology, but my paralegal training helped me parse through the jargon. What I found made my blood run cold. These weren't simple liability waivers. They were quitclaim documents, releasing any and all interest I might have in Charles Vance's estate. They were backdated to 6 months before his death. There were transfer documents moving his assets directly to Robert, bypassing the usual probate process. There were affidavits claiming I had been paid substantial sums for my caretaking services and had no further claims. Everything was a lie. I remembered the envelope Grandpa Charles had given me. I had hidden it in the dusty attic above the guest house, stuffed inside an old hat box that hadn't been opened in decades. With my heart pounding, I climbed up to retrieve it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a will, dated just 3 months before his death. The second was a letter in his handwriting, addressed to me. "My dearest Amelia," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I suspect that Robert has already made his move. I want you to know that I have left the bulk of my estate to you, including my shares in Vance Corp., which represent a controlling interest. I have done this not to hurt Robert, but because I know that you are the only one who will use this wealth wisely and with compassion. You are the only one who ever loved me for who I was, not what I had. Robert has been trying to pressure me to change my will for months. He has Eleanor working on me too, always suggesting that I'm being irrational and emotional in my old age. But I am neither. I am perfectly clear about what I want. This will has been properly executed and witnessed by my attorney, Margaret Chen, who has the original in her care. If Robert presents a different will, know that it is fraudulent. Fight for what is yours, Amelia. You have earned it not through blood, but through love, which is far more valuable. Do not let them take this from you. Do not let them win. With all my love, Grandpa Charles." I read the letter 3 times, then read the will. Everything was there in black and white. The house, the investments, the controlling shares of Vance Corp. $73 million worth of assets, all left to me, and Robert had stolen it all. The next morning, I didn't sign the papers. Instead, I called Margaret Chen, the attorney mentioned in Grandpa Charles's letter. Her secretary told me that Miss Chen had retired 6 months ago and moved to Florida. They had no forwarding address. I asked to speak to Robert's attorney, a man named Harold Whitmore. When I reached him, I asked about Grandpa Charles's will. "Oh yes," Whitmore said smoothly. "Mr. Vance's will was very straightforward. He left everything to his son Robert, with small bequests to Eleanor and Bradley. There was no mention of you, I'm afraid." "That's impossible," I said. "I have a copy of a different will." There was a pause. "Miss Vance, I'm not sure what you think you have, but I personally witnessed Charles Vance's will 6 months before his death. He was very clear about his wishes. If you have some other document, it's not valid. Now, I really must go." He hung up. I sat in my room, the walls closing in. They had done it. They had somehow replaced the real will with a fake one. They had made Margaret Chen disappear. They had backdated everything to make it look legitimate. And now they wanted me to sign away any claim I might have, just to tie up the loose ends. I could have walked away then. I should have walked away. I had $2,000 in my savings account, a job at the law firm, and enough credit to rent a small apartment. I could have started over somewhere else, far from the Vance family and their poison. But I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa Charles's last words. "Fight for what is yours. Don't let them win." So I didn't sign the papers. When Robert called demanding to know where they were, I lied and said I had mailed them. When he came to my room, I wasn't there. I had moved out, packing my few possessions into 2 suitcases and leaving in the middle of the night like a thief. I found a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood 40 minutes away. It was small and shabby, with water stains on the ceiling and a radiator that clanked all night. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I was free from the Vance mansion. But I wasn't free from the Vangies themselves. Robert called constantly, leaving threatening voicemails. Eleanor sent emails suggesting I seek professional help for my delusions. Bradley showed up drunk at my workplace twice, screaming about how I was trying to steal his inheritance. The worst part was that I had no legal standing. Without Margaret Chen or the original will, the document I had was just a photocopy that any judge would dismiss. I had no money for a real attorney. I had no proof that the will currently in probate was fraudulent. I had nothing but rage and a promise to a dead man. That's when I decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. If the Vangies wanted a war, I would give them one. But I would fight smart. I would fight the way Grandpa Charles had taught me. With patience, with strategy, and with the law. The first thing I did was call in sick to work for a week. I spent that time doing research, following every thread I could find. I discovered that Margaret Chen hadn't retired. She had been disbarred for ethical violations 6 months before Grandpa Charles's death. When I dug deeper, I found that the complaint had been filed by Harold Whitmore, Robert's attorney. The violations were vague and poorly documented, but the disbarment had gone through anyway. I found Margaret Chen's daughter on Facebook and sent her a message. She responded within an hour, furious and eager to talk. Her mother hadn't retired. She had been forced out, her reputation destroyed, her practice dismantled. And she knew exactly who was behind it. My mom kept copies of everything, her daughter told me over coffee at a diner in Queens. She knew that bastard Vance was going to come after her. She's got the original will, the original correspondence, everything. She's been waiting for someone to ask. 3 days later, I was on a plane to Sarasota, Florida, using the last of my credit card limit. Margaret Chen lived in a modest condo near the beach. She was 72 years old, with steel gray hair and eyes like a hawk. "I knew you'd come eventually," she said, ushering me inside. "Charles told me you were smart. He said you were a fighter." She gave me everything. The original will, properly executed and notarized. Copies of emails between Robert and Harold Whitmore discussing how to handle the Margaret Chen problem. Copies of the fake will, with notations showing where the forgery had been done. Even a recorded conversation between Robert and a document expert, discussing the cost of aging paper and ink to make a backdated will look authentic. "Why didn't you come forward?" I asked. "Why didn't you report this?" Margaret's face hardened. "I tried. I went to the police. I went to the Connecticut Bar Association. But Robert Vance has connections everywhere. People I trusted turned on me. Evidence disappeared. Suddenly, I was the one under investigation for fraud, for malpractice, for every charge they could dream up. They destroyed me, Amelia. They took my license, my reputation, everything I had worked 40 years to build, so I left. I came down here to lick my wounds and wait." "Wait for what?" I asked. She smiled grimly. "For someone brave enough to use what I gave them. For Charles's granddaughter to grow up and become the warrior he knew she could be." I flew back to Connecticut with a steel briefcase full of evidence and a fire in my belly. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed a lawyer willing to go up against the Vangies. I needed someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. I found her in the Yellow Pages. Sarah Jenkins had a one-room office above a dry cleaner in New Haven. She was 58 years old, with graying blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and a face that had seen too many disappointments. Her website advertised affordable legal representation and free consultations. When I laid out the evidence on her cluttered desk, she didn't say anything for a long time. She just read, her eyes moving rapidly across the pages, her expression growing darker. "This is ironclad," she finally said. "This is the kind of case that law students dream about. Why are you bringing it to me? You could take this to any big firm in the state and they'd be salivating." "Because big firms want money I don't have," I said. "And because I asked around. I heard what Robert Vance did to you." Sarah's face went still. "What did you hear?" "I heard that 12 years ago, you represented a small business owner who was being forced out by Vance Corp's predatory practices. I heard that you almost won. I heard that the night before the trial, your lead witness recanted his testimony, your key documents disappeared from your office, and your client suddenly decided to settle for pennies on the dollar. I heard that you spent years trying to rebuild your reputation after Robert Vance made sure everyone knew you were the lawyer who had lost the unlosable case." Sarah's hands trembled slightly. "He destroyed me. I lost my partnership, my clients, my marriage. I spent a decade clawing my way back to this." She gestured around the shabby office. "This is all I have left." "Then help me take everything from him," I said. "Help me give him a taste of what he gave you." She looked at me for a long moment, then slowly smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "However long it takes," I said. "I'm not in a hurry. I want to do this right. Then we need to be smart, Sarah said, already making notes. If we go straight to court with this, Robert will bury us in motions and delays. He'll make it so expensive that we'll run out of money before we run out of legal options. We need to build an airtight case, but we also need leverage. What kind of leverage? I asked. Sarah looked up, and her smile turned sharp. The kind that destroys reputations, the kind that makes investors nervous, the kind that makes the SEC come knocking. Robert Vance didn't just steal your inheritance, Amelia. Men like him never stop at one crime. If he was willing to forge a will, he's willing to do a lot worse. We need to find every piece of dirt we can dig up, and then we need to make him afraid. And so began the most intense year of my life. I quit my job at the law firm and took a position as a low-level administrative assistant at a company that did business with Vance Corp. It was a huge pay cut, but it gave me access. I made copies of contracts. I memorized the names of Robert's business associates. I learned who could be bought and who couldn't. At night, I studied. Sarah was teaching me more than law. She was teaching me strategy, how to read between the lines of corporate filings, how to spot money laundering in investment portfolios, how to trace shell companies and offshore accounts, how to think like a criminal so I could catch one. We hired a private investigator named Marcus Miller, an ex-cop who had been forced into early retirement after testifying against a corrupt superior. He was expensive, but Sarah called in every favor she had to cover his fees. Marcus started following Robert's trail, documenting every shady deal, every suspicious transaction, every whispered conversation in expensive restaurants. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Robert wasn't just a thief. He was running Vance Corp like his personal piggy bank. He had set up a network of shell companies to siphon off profits. He was taking kickbacks from contractors. He was using company funds to pay off Bradley's gambling debts, which ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the more we dug, the more we found. Eleanor was using company credit cards to fund her shopping addiction. Bradley had been given a fake executive position with a $250,000 salary for a job he never actually did. Robert had bribed city officials to secure zoning changes. The list went on and on. But we didn't strike yet. We couldn't. We needed everything to be perfect, because we would only get one shot at this. While we built our case, I started my own quiet campaign of sabotage. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be traced back to me. Just little nudges that sent dominoes falling. I anonymously tipped off a business reporter about irregularities in Vance Corp's latest SEC filing. The resulting article was small, just a paragraph in the business section, but it planted seeds of doubt. I accidentally left some of Bradley's financial documents at a bar frequented by loan sharks. Within a week, he was being hounded by debt collectors. I created a fake email account and sent messages to Robert's business partners, posing as a concerned employee, hinting at improprieties. Most ignored it, but a few started asking questions. Each move was small, barely noticeable on its own. But together, they created a steady pressure, a growing sense that something was wrong at Vance Corp. Stock prices began to slip. Partners started hedging their bets. Robert's hair-trigger temper got worse, and through it all, I was invisible. I was nobody. I was just Amelia, the girl who had slunk away in the night, the girl they had forgotten about as soon as she stopped being useful. 14 months after I had walked out of the Vance mansion, Sarah called me into her office. "We're ready," she said simply. I felt my heart start to race. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. We have everything. The original will, Margaret's testimony, financial records showing fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. We have Bradley dead to rights on tax evasion. We even have evidence that Robert tried to bribe a judge in an unrelated case 3 years ago." She spread the documents across her desk like a winning poker hand. "The question is, how hard do you want to hit them?" I thought about all the years of humiliation. I thought about the nights I went to bed hungry because I wasn't real family. I thought about Grandpa Charles, dying peacefully in his sleep, never knowing that his son would betray him before his body was even cold. "As hard as we can," I said. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the story had hit every major news outlet in Connecticut. Vance Corp heir claims massive fraud. The headlines screamed, "Forged will in multi-million-dollar estate battle." Robert called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. Eleanor sent emails, alternating between threats and pleas. I deleted them all. Bradley showed up at my apartment building, screaming my name in the parking lot until the police came. I watched it all unfold with a curious detachment. This was just the opening salvo. The real battle would be fought in court. The trial was set for 3 months later, which gave both sides time to prepare. Robert hired a team of lawyers from the most expensive firm in the state. They filed motion after motion, trying to get the case dismissed, trying to suppress evidence, trying to delay the inevitable. But Sarah was ready for every trick. She had been doing this for 30 years, and she knew every loophole, every procedural rule, every way to counter their moves, and she had something Robert's lawyers didn't have. She had the truth. During those 3 months, the pressure on the Vance family intensified. The SEC opened an investigation into Vance Corp's finances. Several business partners quietly pulled out of deals. The company's stock price dropped by 40%. Shareholders started demanding answers. I caught glimpses of them sometimes, on the news or in the tabloids. Robert looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. Eleanor's smile had become frozen, brittle. Bradley was photographed leaving a rehab facility, looking 20 years older than his age. They were falling apart, and I had barely even touched them yet. The trial began on a cold Tuesday in October. I wore a simple black suit that Sarah had helped me pick out. Professional, competent, unintimidating. I was nobody special, just a girl who wanted what was rightfully hers. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, their cameras ready. Curious onlookers jostled for seats. This was the kind of story that fed the tabloids. Wealthy family, betrayal, forged documents, a plucky underdog, fighting for justice. And then the Vangees walked in. Robert in his $1,000 suit, Eleanor dripping in jewelry, Bradley swaggering like he owned the place. They saw me sitting at the plaintiff's table and their faces twisted with contempt. Eleanor leaned over and whispered something to Robert. They both laughed. That's when Judge Morrison entered. That's when his face went pale. That's when everything started to unravel for them. Because Judge Morrison was an old friend of Grandpa Charles. They had served together on various charitable boards, had played golf together every Sunday for 15 years. And Judge Morrison had heard stories about Robert's stepdaughter, the girl Charles had loved like his own blood. Miss Vance, the judge said, his voice carefully neutral but his eyes kind. I knew your grandfather well. He was a good man. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I could feel Robert's stare burning into the back of my head. This was already going wrong for him, and the trial hadn't even started. Sarah gave her opening statement first. She laid out the facts simply and clearly. Charles Vance had executed a valid will, leaving his estate to his granddaughter. That will had been replaced with a forgery. The defendants had engaged in fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to deprive me of my rightful inheritance. The evidence will show, Sarah said, looking directly at the jury, that this is not a case of family squabbling over money. This is a case of calculated, deliberate theft. The defendants didn't just steal money from Amelia Vance. They stole her grandfather's last act of love. They betrayed a dying man's final wishes. And they did it because they believed they could get away with it, because they believed that power and money put them above the law. Robert's attorney, a slick man in his 60s named Preston Waverly, tried to paint me as a gold digger, a manipulative girl who had deceived a senile old man. Charles Vance was suffering from heart failure, Waverly argued. He was on heavy medications that affected his judgment. The plaintiff isolated him from his family, controlled his access to information, and pressured him to change his will. The will that is currently in probate represents Charles Vance's true wishes, made when he was of sound mind. It was a good argument. It might have even worked if we hadn't had Margaret Chen. She took the stand on the second day of trial, and she was magnificent, calm, precise, unshakable. She testified that Charles Vance had been completely lucid when he executed his will. She produced her detailed notes from their meetings, showing that he had been clear-headed and specific about his intentions. She explained how Robert had threatened her, how he had engineered her disbarment, how he had stolen the original will from her office safe. Mr. Vance told me explicitly, Margaret said, looking straight at Robert, that he was leaving everything to Amelia because she was the only one who loved him for himself. He said his son had become a stranger, someone who only cared about money and power. He wanted to make sure Amelia would be taken care of, and that she would have the resources to live a good life. That was his dying wish. Preston Waverly tried to break her on cross-examination, but Margaret had been practicing law for 40 years. She had been deposed, cross-examined, and challenged by attorneys far more skilled than Waverly. She didn't budge. Next came Marcus Miller, our private investigator. He presented a mountain of evidence showing Robert's financial crimes, shell companies, falsified tax returns, money laundering through offshore accounts. He had bank statements showing Bradley's gambling debts being paid with company funds. He had emails proving Eleanor had used corporate credit cards to buy jewelry worth over $300,000. He had recorded phone calls where Robert discussed bribing city officials. The evidence was damning, overwhelming, irrefutable. But the most devastating moment came when we played a video recording. Marcus had managed to install a hidden camera in Robert's home office 6 months earlier, during a party where I had briefly returned under the pretense of collecting some old belongings. The camera had captured Robert and Harold Whitmore, his attorney, discussing the forgery in explicit detail. The courtroom fell silent as Robert's voice filled the room. The old man actually thought I'd let some nobody inherit everything I built, everything I sacrificed for. He must have been completely senile. Whitmore's voice responded, tinny through the speaker. The document looks good. The paper aging came out perfectly. No one will be able to tell it's not from 6 months ago. And Margaret Chen? Taken care of. by the time we're done with her, she'll be lucky if she can get a job as a paralegal." Robert laughed. "Good, and the girl?" "She's nobody. She has no money, no connections, no standing. Even if she suspects something, what's she going to do? She'll sign the papers and disappear, just like her mother." The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Every eye turned to Robert. His face had gone from red to white to gray. Eleanor's mouth hung open. Bradley looked like he might vomit. Judge Morrison's expression was granite. "Mr. Waverly, does the defense wish to respond to this evidence?" Preston Waverly stood slowly. He looked like a man whose ship was sinking. "Your Honor, we would request a recess to review this new material with our clients." "Denied," the judge said coldly. "The defense may cross-examine the witness." But there was no cross-examination that could explain away that recording. Waverly tried, fumbling through questions about the legality of the recording, about whether it had been obtained properly, about whether it had been edited. Marcus calmly answered each question, producing authentication records, chain of custody documentation, expert analysis confirming the video was genuine and unaltered. When court recessed for the day, I saw Robert in the hallway, surrounded by his legal team. They were arguing in harsh whispers. Eleanor was crying, mascara running down her face. Bradley was nowhere to be seen. Robert's eyes met mine across the crowded hallway. For the first time since I had known him, I saw fear. Real, genuine fear. He knew he had lost. He just didn't know how badly yet. That night, Robert called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Amelia," he said, his voice stripped of all its usual arrogance. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," I said. "Please, just listen. I know you're angry. I know I haven't always treated you fairly, but this has gone too far. You're destroying this family." "I'm destroying the family?" I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. "You stole my inheritance. You forged my grandfather's will. You tried to erase me from existence, and I'm the one destroying the family?" "It was the company," Robert said desperately. "I needed the capital. Vance Corp was in trouble. I was going to pay you back eventually, I swear. But if this trial continues, everything will collapse. The company will be destroyed. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. Is that what you want?" What I want," I said slowly, "is for you to experience one fraction of what I experienced. What I want is for you to know what it feels like to have everything taken from you by someone you trusted. What I want is justice." "I'll give you money," Robert said. "Name your price. 10 million. 20. I'll liquidate personal assets. You can have the house in the Hamptons. Just drop the lawsuit. Please." "You still don't understand," I said. "This was never about the money. This is about a promise I made to a man I loved. A man you betrayed. Your own father." "He was senile," Robert snapped, his true nature emerging. "He didn't know what he was doing. You manipulated him." "Goodbye, Robert," I said, and hung up. He called back 17 more times that night. I didn't answer. The trial resumed the next morning. Sarah called me to the witness stand. I had been dreading this moment. I'm not a natural public speaker. I'm not charismatic or compelling. I'm just a girl who survived something terrible. But Sarah had prepared me well. "Miss Vance," she began gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with Charles Vance?" And so I did. I told them everything. Not the legal facts, not the dry recitation of evidence, but the human story underneath. I told them about Grandpa Charles teaching me to play chess, about how patient he was when I couldn't understand a move. I told them about the Sunday mornings we spent reading the newspaper together, arguing about politics and laughing at the comics. I told them about how he was the only person who came to my high school graduation, the only person who told me he was proud of me. I told them about the last months of his life, about helping him dress when his hands couldn't manage the buttons anymore, about reading to him when his eyes were too tired, about holding his hand while he slept because he said it made him feel less alone. He was the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered, I said, and my voice cracked. The only person who treated me like family, and they took his last gift to me. They took his final act of love and they threw it away like garbage because they thought I was too weak to fight back. The jury was watching me with intense attention. Several jurors had tears in their eyes. Even Judge Morrison looked moved. Preston Waverly tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He suggested I had coerced Grandpa Charles. He implied I had been after his money all along. He made snide comments about my mother, about my background, about my character. I didn't rise to the bait. I just answered each question calmly and truthfully, because the truth was stronger than any lie he could tell. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt lighter. I had told my truth. Whatever happened next, I had honored Grandpa Charles's memory. But Sarah wasn't done. She had one more witness, one more piece of evidence that would seal the case completely. Martha Rodriguez had been the housekeeper at the Vance mansion for 23 years. She had cleaned the rooms, cooked the meals, and witnessed everything that happened in that house. She was a small woman in her 60s with graying hair and nervous hands. Mrs. Rodriguez. Sarah asked, "What did you witness on the night of March 18th, 2 days after Charles Vance's death?" Martha's voice was quiet but clear. "I saw Mr. Robert and Mrs. Eleanor in Mr. Charles's study. It was very late, almost midnight. I had come back because I forgot my reading glasses. They didn't know I was there." "What were they doing?" "They were burning papers. Lots of papers. Mr. Robert had a metal wastebasket and he was feeding documents into it, one by one. Mrs. Eleanor was helping him. I heard her say, 'Are you sure this is all of them?' And Mr. Robert said, 'It better be. If that little bitch finds anything, we're screwed.'" The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison had to bang his gavel 3 times to restore order. Preston Waverly was on his feet, objecting strenuously, but the judge overruled him. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Sarah continued, "why didn't you come forward with this information before?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared. Mr. Robert, he pays my salary. He pays for my daughter's college. I have a grandson with medical problems, and the insurance from this job, it's the only way we can afford his treatments. I thought if I said nothing, it would be okay. But then I saw Miss Amelia on the news, and I remembered how good Mr. Charles was to her, how much he loved her, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Some things are more important than money." It was over. Even Preston Waverly knew it. He barely bothered with cross-examination. The trial lasted 2 more days, as both sides presented their closing arguments, but everyone in that courtroom knew what the verdict would be. The evidence was too strong, too comprehensive, too damning. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict in a steady voice. "In the matter of the estate of Charles Vance, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Amelia Vance. We find that the will currently in probate is fraudulent, and that the will presented by the plaintiff is valid and binding." Sarah squeezed my hand. I couldn't breathe. This was real. This was actually happening. But the forewoman wasn't done. "Furthermore, we find that the defendants, Robert Vance, Eleanor Vance, and Bradley Vance, engaged in fraud, conspiracy, and theft. We recommend that all evidence be forwarded to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Eleanor let out a wail that echoed through the courtroom. Bradley was shouting something incoherent. Robert just sat there, statue still, his face a mask of shock. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. "Order. The court accepts the jury's verdict. Miss Amelia Vance is hereby declared the rightful heir to Charles Vance's estate, including all property, investments, and shares in Vance Corp. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate freeze on all Vance Corp assets, pending a full forensic audit. The defendants are ordered to surrender their passports and remain in the jurisdiction. This court is adjourned." I stood up, my legs shaking. Sarah was hugging me, saying something about how we won, how we actually won. Around us, reporters were shouting questions, cameras were flashing. But I only had eyes for Robert. He was standing now, his lawyers trying to hustle him out of the courtroom. But he turned, just for a moment, and looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked back at him, my expression empty. That was the real punishment. Not hatred, not anger, just complete and utter indifference. He no longer mattered to me. As they left, Eleanor was still crying. Bradley was shouting at someone on his phone, and Robert walked like a man going to his execution. The aftermath came quickly. Within a week, criminal charges were filed against all 3 Vangees. Robert was charged with fraud, forgery, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy. Eleanor faced charges related to her misuse of corporate funds. Bradley was charged with tax evasion and accepting proceeds from fraud. Vance Corp collapsed almost overnight. The board of directors, facing the scandal and the criminal investigation, resigned en masse. Partners pulled out of deals. Investors fled. The stock became worthless. I could have let it all burn. Part of me wanted to, but I remembered what Grandpa Charles had built, the legitimate business underneath all of Robert's corruption. I remembered the employees who had nothing to do with the fraud, the people whose livelihoods depended on the company. So I stepped in. As the majority shareholder, I took control of Vance Corp. I hired a new CEO, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had a reputation for turning around troubled companies. I cooperated fully with the SEC investigation, providing every document they requested. I settled with creditors, restructured debt, sold off the corrupt subsidiaries. It took 2 years, but Vance Corp survived. Smaller, leaner, but clean, and profitable. The criminal trials for Robert, Eleanor, and Bradley took place over the following year. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching justice unfold. Robert was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Eleanor got 8 years. Bradley, who cut a deal and testified against his father, got 5 years and 3 years probation. I watched them being led away in handcuffs. I waited to feel something. Triumph, satisfaction, joy. But all I felt was tired. and free. 3 years after that horrible Tuesday when I walked into the courtroom, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse apartment overlooking Long Island Sound. The apartment wasn't ostentatious. It was comfortable, elegant, mine. I had spent the morning in meetings with the Vance Foundation, a charitable organization I had created to honor Grandpa Charles's memory. We funded scholarships for kids in foster care, kids who had aged out of the system, kids who needed someone to believe in them. Sarah Jenkins was now the foundation's general counsel, running a team of 5 lawyers. Marcus Miller headed up our investigation division, helping other victims of financial fraud. Martha Rodriguez's daughter had graduated from medical school on a Vance Foundation scholarship. Margaret Chen sat on our board of directors. I had built something good from the ashes of their greed. I had taken the money they stole and used it to help people who needed it. That felt like the right kind of revenge. Not destruction for its own sake, but transformation. Taking something poisoned and making it clean. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered it anyway. Amelia? The voice was older, weaker, but unmistakably Robert's. It's me. I hadn't heard from him since his sentencing. What do you want? I'm calling from prison. They give us 10 minutes a week. He paused. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I waited. He didn't continue. Is that all? I asked finally. I was wrong, he said, the words coming slowly, painfully. About everything. About you. About what my father wanted. About what really matters. I lost everything because I couldn't see past my own greed. I destroyed my family, my company, my life. And for what? I didn't even get to enjoy the money. No, I agreed. You didn't. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. I thought about that question for a long time. Did I hate him? Did I hate Eleanor? Or Bradley? Or any of them? No, I said finally. I don't hate you. I don't feel anything about you at all. You're just someone I used to know. Someone who taught me what kind of person I don't want to be. That's worse than hate, Robert said, and he sounded close to tears. Maybe, I said. But it's the truth. Goodbye, Robert. I hung up and blocked the number. That chapter of my life was over. I had no desire to revisit it. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I poured myself a glass of wine and leaned against the railing. Tomorrow I had meetings about expanding the foundation's reach to 3 new states. Next week I was giving a speech at a conference about corporate ethics. Next month I was testifying before a congressional committee about strengthening inheritance fraud laws. I had built a life I was proud of. A life Grandpa Charles would have been proud of, not because of the money, though the financial security was nice, but because I had taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and turned it into fuel for something better. I thought about that girl from 4 years ago, the one who lived in a basement room and believed she deserved nothing, the one who apologized for taking up space, the one who signed papers without reading them because she was too afraid to say no. That girl was gone. She had died the moment I read Grandpa Charles's letter and decided to fight. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who would never again let another person define her value. I raised my glass to the setting sun, to the city spread out below me, to the future that was mine to shape. I did it, Grandpa, I whispered. I fought for what was mine. I didn't let them win, and I became someone you'd be proud of. The wind carried my words away, and I smiled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying someone else's weight. I wasn't trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I wasn't making myself small to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. I was just Amelia. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.